Good evening, America. This is Q News Tonight, the world's first live daily gay evening news show, and it's 7 p.m. Wednesday, February 12th, 2020. Q News Tonight is live and unscripted, so anything can happen tonight, and we bring you the news of and the perspective from the LGBT community. As you know, I'm your anchor, Al Ferguson, and these are my co-anchor partners, Aaron Darr and Napoleon Plays, and let's cue up tonight's news. We begin with breaking Q News that shows in polls that Bernie Sanders is now leading the 2020 Democratic nomination as frontrunner across the country. We've prepared this piece about it. Watch this.
Yes, but I want to say the reason I went for Bernie is because of MSNBC. And
Go on.
I think it is completely cynical to say that he's lost 50% of his vote from the last time when there were two candidates. Now there are multiple wonderful candidates who would be great presidents.
Bernie Sanders is leading in the national polls, and he's actually being promoted by a lot of headlines in newspapers on Morning Joe today. A lot of people are stating that Sanders has won both the first two states and primaries, but that Klobuchar has surprised in terms of what's going on. He is likely to be the extremist, the high liberal candidate with a conservative of one of the other three, Biden, Klobuchar, or Buttigieg, that will follow up. So we're seeing what's happening with Bernie and seeing if he will push his voters to potentially vote for other people or if he's going to double down on himself.
We continue in our Breaking Q News about the politics that's going on nationally to report that Mayor Pete, the first openly gay presidential candidate in history, is the closest now to winning the Democratic nomination. But could his past be an issue? Before we discuss the news breaking here, we've prepared this. Watch.
You win some delegates, but a close race like this doesn't give you a delegate advantage because it is split up proportionally. That's why you see Sanders winning 9 tonight, Buttigieg winning 9 tonight, because they were so close, and then Klobuchar getting the other 6. Let's take a look at the delegates to date. Include Iowa in there now that we've been through 2 contests. Remember, up there in the corner, you see you need 1,991 delegates to win the nomination. This is the beginning of a long road to that Democratic convention in Milwaukee. Take a look at where we are. Buttigieg actually has a 2-delegate lead.
Pete Buttigieg is the first LGBTQ candidate to be running for the presidential office. However, some are stating that he does exemplify some levels of white privilege or a lack of struggle that others of different people of color and other minorities might experience, which is not to say that it's not a struggle in itself. This has been stated to be white supremacy cloaked in a suit and a tie. Of course, black prison inmates are given sentences that are over 20 times frequently that of white prison inmates, and have county school systems that have $23 billion less than white counties. But the whole controversy arises over South Bend, Indiana, because when Pete Buttigieg was first put in office in 2012 as the mayor, within 3 months of being in office, over 3 high-profile African-American jobs suddenly vanished, and the people that were in those places were no longer there. So he's being uncovered, as some say, as being racist.
Well, certainly historic. Mayor Pete has won New Hampshire in a tie with Bernie Sanders, the same number of delegates, but he is now leading the delegate count from the Iowa caucus and from the New Hampshire primary. And as the first LGBT presidential candidate in history, that is historic. Tonight, we can report on February 12th, a historic event is occurring in American politics.
And speaking of LGBT events, are LGBT voices important to you? Can the news of the world have a gay community perspective? If you, like us, think the answer is a resounding yes, then like and subscribe to Q News Tonight on Facebook and on YouTube. Do our gay cultural stories impact you, your friends, and family? Start a watch party. Get your circle involved in our conversation as it supports the gay community. It's that simple.
It allows us to continue in our breaking news of talking about Vote 2020 to report that Sanders and Pete did very well last night in New Hampshire, but interesting that Klo-Mentum is now absolutely real. Before we discuss that story, watch this.
Ed, talk a little bit more about the exit polls that really show that Amy Klobuchar was able to convert people since Friday night. We were hearing from voters in New Hampshire originally that they liked Senator Klobuchar, but they weren't sure if maybe other people liked her, so they weren't sure if they're going to vote her. That seemed to change.
It sure did, because of that commanding debate performance. It's proof that you show up for those debates, you do your homework, it might pay off. At one point last night, the numbers were showing that something like 7 in 10 of her voters were people who had decided who to vote for in just the last few days.
This girl is on fire. As you just saw, United States Senator and 2020 Democratic presidential candidate Amy Klobuchar is surging, coming in third place in New Hampshire. She earned 6 out of the 24 delegates that were up for grabs. And since the primary in New Hampshire has ended, and 4 to 5 hour period, she raised more than $2.4 million. So she continues to earn the financial resources to go on to compete in future primaries.
She raised more money in 4 hours last night than in first weeks of her campaign. Absolutely amazing.
Yes.
An incredible note. We continue in Vote 2020 to talk about Elizabeth Warren. The one thing Warren apparently didn't have a plan for, and why it may have killed her campaign. Aaron, tell us about what's going on with Elizabeth Warren.
Yeah, so this is a really disappointing story for those who are perhaps supporting Senator Warren. She came in third in Iowa and fourth in New Hampshire. And part of this is, of course, sexism and this greater conversation about likability. And she's competing for a lot of the same voters that Bernie Sanders is also going after. But the larger part of this conversation is Medicare for all. She initially supported the same Medicare for all plan that Senator Sanders has, that she backed away from it, saying that she wanted to move forward in a plan of a public option that would eventually be the foundation for a plan like Medicare for all. She, of course, has released 2 different figures saying of how she would pay for it, and it's skeptics, of course, going on to say that they didn't think that those numbers were very realistic.
Do you think she's going to find her legs?
I don't, no, unfortunately. And I appreciate her. She'd be one of the last people that I would vote for. But I would have an easier time voting for her as the Democratic nominee than I would Senator Sanders. She's much more pragmatic.
We continue in Vote 2020 with the 5th place finisher last night in New Hampshire. And here is why Joe Biden's campaign collapsed out of nowhere. Napoleon, tell us what's going on with Vice President Biden.
You just highlighted part of it. He's come in 5th in the only 2 primaries that we've seen. At a recent event, he called one of the constituents that was there to represent a lying, dog-faced pony soldier because he didn't like what she had to say, or at least disagreed with what she had to put forward. His allegations of having a corrupt son that have been coming forward in the impeachment, as well as some of his past in 1988 and in 2008 when he ran for the presidential bid, but didn't win a single primary or even the top 2. All of this is coming into his present state. He's seen by a lot of people as a generic Democratic challenger rather than a person of substance. And as his campaign is going on, it is believed that perhaps people are seeing him for who he is and not as this great candidate, but just as a hollow shell.
I'm curious, do you think Biden's seeming collapse is the tidal wave that's heading right for him called Michael Bloomberg?
Well, I don't think that Joe Biden has collapsed. I think that this is a false narrative that the media is trying to play into that is actually going to build Joe Biden up. The next caucus is going to be on February 22nd. There are 36 delegates up for grabs, and polling today shows that Joe Biden is number 1 in Nevada, and he's number 1 in South Carolina. He has that Obama coalition, those black voters. The first 2 states, Iowa and New Hampshire, are overwhelmingly white. And that is not representational of this country or the Democratic Party or the coalition that one needs to put together to be able to win the Electoral College in 2020. So I would not write off Joe Biden at all.
I honestly don't know what has been the statement from the press, because it's been said that he is the front runner, but I haven't seen him do anything that merits that title this entire time that he's been in the presidency, or at least in the campaign to win the bid. He has not done anything this election cycle that has put him forward ahead of anybody else, and we're seeing that every single time that it's coming to numbers.
I want to bring what we have seen in Iowa and New Hampshire to a close in preparation for Nevada and South Carolina, refocusing on the LGBT perspective of Mayor Pete. Any quick thoughts in terms of the history that we're sitting at here on Wednesday, February 12th, about Mayor Pete? Any final thoughts of what we've seen in the first two?
Well, according to the polls that I've seen today, that are an average of 3 big polls in Nevada, Pete is only at 7%. So, I mean, I think that talks to a larger conversation that his campaign is going to have to deal with, that he's going to have a hard time courting the electorate, the coalition that he needs to win big if he is a Democratic nominee, and that's people of color, that's minorities, that's a lot of individuals who were not in Iowa, and they were not in New Hampshire, which again are over.
I understand clearly. You're saying because Iowa and New Hampshire was overwhelmingly white in the 90 percentile, he has been very competitive. When he moves to places that are not, he is not going to do well.
I don't see it at this point. According to the polls that I see in South Carolina and in Nevada, I mean, he's at 7% in Nevada and he's at 4% in South Carolina. In both of those states, if we're going off of polls, Joe Biden's leading in both of those states. So we're going to continue to see how this plays out. But you know, like I know, 2 days, 2 weeks is a very long time in politics.
Okay.
So Q News Tonight, speaking of politics, this is why Q News Tonight is here, because Q News Tonight is part of the Happening Out television network. We are the Daily News. But you can also watch the best of entertainment live every Monday night on happening.fun. We are also part of the most popular live gay TV show in the world, which airs tonight at 8 p.m. on It's Happening Out. It's a talk show like television's The View, with a whole lot of gay people, 2 of them sitting right across from me.
Oh, child, you've been on that show so many times. I know.
Not as many as you.
Exactly. All right, well, let's cue up the USA and continue. Attorney General Barr is burning up social media as he has unleashed the Justice Department and unleashed chaos over Roger Stone's sentencing. Before we discuss this, watch this.
And for the president now to intervene through his attorney general to seek lighter sentences for people who were covering up his own misconduct is just an egregious violation of the rule of law.
The president said from the Oval Office last night that he did not intervene.
No, I didn't speak to the justice. I'd be able to do it if I wanted. I have the absolute right to do it. I stay out of things to a degree that people wouldn't believe, but I didn't speak to him.
So as our viewers just saw, 4 prosecutors have quit the case in regards to the United States Attorney General Bill Barr reversing the sentences sentence of Roger Stone, stating that it was too harsh and it was much too long. Of course, Donald Trump, a very close and personal friend of Roger Stone, going on to thank very much so publicly on Twitter the Attorney General and his conduct, and saying that this was a win. And so it really begs to ask the question in the broader spectrum. And the Department of Justice is supposed to be nonpartisan, not political at all. But is William Barr a political hire at the Department of Justice? Is this partisan?
The answer is clearly yes.
It is.
There's no doubt about it. The Attorney General is a policeman or a thug. For the president, for him
the Trump mafia.
Yes, for him to intervene in this situation, the indication of Department of Justice career attorneys resigning over this is an indication of an unacceptable line that was crossed here at the direction of the White House. There's just no question about what Attorney General Barr is doing, which is the reason why from the beginning of the Mueller report, this was the situation of Jeff Sessions and his situation of recusing himself. It's exactly
the corruption is widespread.
Widespread, no question about it. Tonight we wanted to let you know that we are broadcasting from our new set in the middle of the World AIDS Museum and Education Center here in Wilton Manors, Fort Lauderdale, Florida. We joke, as I sit with Napoleon and Aaron, that we are coming from the gayest place on planet Earth. And we pretty much are. I think it is a given. And we'd also like to thank our set designer, Concepto Modern Living, located here in Fort Lauderdale, for the help in designing this beautiful new set here. We continue in queuing up the USA by talking about a legal ruling that may force Georgia's governor to show how he, quote unquote, stole the election from Abrams. Before Aaron tells us about that, we've prepared this. Watch.
Brian Kemp is not only the Republican gubernatorial nominee, he's Georgia's Secretary of State, and now civil rights groups are suing him, claiming that Kemp's office put more than 53,000 voter registrations on hold. An analysis by the Associated Press shows that nearly 70% of those voter registrations are those belonging to African Americans. This is all because of the exact match law, which is used here, and that means any typo or even a missing hyphen between the voter's ID and their voter registration can be flagged.
A judge could demand that Georgia Governor Brian Kemp reveal his methodology for purging over 700,000 names from state rolls between 2016 and 2018 when he was Secretary of State in Georgia before running for governor of Georgia. Brian Kemp is alleged to have used racial bias to purge over 500,000 voters from the rolls, and names purged were not even notified of their changed status on the Georgia books. I'm so glad that we're doing this story, not because of the loss that it was for the Democratic community and for women and for people of color in Georgia when Stacey Abrams did not win this, but she's actually contested this and she didn't concede right away. And this is why it's so important that we have this aspect of the conversation. And it's that this man was Secretary of State who, in Georgia, they run the election, and he's running for governor at the time. So how do you not?
And he wouldn't recuse himself.
And he would not recuse himself. How do you not recuse yourself?
Yeah, exactly.
It's absolutely ludicrous.
You know, the allegations that he could be blocking people from voting, even in a time where we say voter suppression isn't real, or that the 5 people that might have had fraudulent IDs voted in whatever county that they did, is ridiculous, because he's priming himself while he gets into office to allow himself to get in without the votes that he should need. We're seeing that happen in every level of politics.
I also think that this story is very interesting for the LGBT community because it is a really perfect illustration of how a major thing beyond the quality of candidates is so important on who gets elected. If we allow suppression in our voting systems like this of purging our rolls, making it more difficult to register, making it more difficult to go to the polls, gerrymandering districts, which is what the courts get involved in all of the time, we are, groups of people are fundamentally figuring out how to disrupt our election process.
And that's why this year is more important than ever, because it's a decade year, it's the census year, and so we're evaluating how our votes are going to be tallied across the country.
And unfortunately, this isn't new. I mean, in 2018, I myself even got a letter from my, when I lived in Pinellas County, which is St. Petersburg, Clearwater area here in Florida, I got a letter from my supervisor of elections, Deborah Clark, saying that I had 2 weeks to respond to this letter or I would have been thrown off the rolls because allegedly my signature didn't match a signature that they had on file when I had turned in my ballot. So again, they do this to go after people that are particularly super voters or young or people of color or women or people who are more inclined to vote for Democrats. And because I know quite a few people that literally they don't miss any election. They were super voters, and a lot of them were between the age of 18 and 29.
Yeah, it's a story that we have to, over the next 10 minutes, watch very, very closely. We're going to queue up religion tonight here at Q News Tonight about an argument that has erupted at General Synod over LGBT rights in the church. In the discussion of this, we've prepared this video package. Watch this.
I'm never going to persuade a number of people in this room that this is not a first order issue. And there are people in this room who are never going to convince me that one's sexuality is not a matter of choice, it's how you happen to be. I mean, I happen to be heterosexual. That's not a choice on my part. That is just how I am. And if it's not a choice, I can't see that it can be sinful. So I think there needs to be an acknowledgement that we may never be able to persuade each other to a common view on this.
The General Synod is the legislation of the church, and this March they vote on their final documentation in the LLF, the Living in Love and Faith Project, which identifies human identity, relationships, and marriage, as well as sex, as it has been purveyed for the last 2 years. The idea is that they want to come to terms with how LGBT people that want rights and representation can come to terms with people that think that that is against the religion. But what has been stated is that this is kicking the can down the road. And that's a quotation, that they're not actually getting anywhere and they're just moving the glass of water down without ever getting a sip of it. What has been stated about it is that these are different churches and that they should each be able to have their own standpoint, but that each side, very contrasting sides, may never be able to persuade each other to actually find a common view. So this could go on forever.
We continue in queuing up business tonight, and we report it affects the LGBT community significantly as U.S. telecoms giant behemoths get a $26 billion takeover ruling in their favor. We've prepared this news. Watch this.
As the judge approves that $26 billion T-Mobile Sprint deal, David's got details.
Yeah, let's get right to it this morning, of course. We learned about an hour ago, as we actually learned late yesterday, would probably be the case. Judge Marrero, a case that we've been watching so closely, 13 states, of course, opposing the merger of T-Mobile and Sprint. Judge Marrero ruling in favor of the companies, saying you can proceed with the deal.
So majority of U.S. mobile phone users will now be served by just 3 networks: Verizon, AT&T, and the new T-Mobile, after T-Mobile US and Sprint and a $26 billion deal have merged together, and collectively the both of them still being the third largest mobile phone entity in the entire country. I think the wider aspect of this conversation needs to be that this continues to put a monopoly on the mobile phone industry, where these individuals and these companies can increase prices on people because there's less competition, because there are less companies to be able to offer a wide spectrum of prices to consumers.
Having the phone is a fundamental issue for the LGBT community. We do everything in it.
You do
your
for
grinder
everyone.
15 hours a day.
That's true, and I need my free internet to make that possible. And that's why this is a little bit alarming to me. I mean, this isn't getting me Wolverine and Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four meeting the Avengers. This isn't giving me any sort of fan payoff. This is just going to end up charging me more and giving me some kind of higher bill on a weekly basis.
How would I go to Domino's?
Yes, and
Uber Eats.
Text the pizza emoji just to Domino's at 555.
And your grinder hookups. That's the most important thing. We continue in queuing up to the USA by reporting tonight a gay Salvadoran asylum seeker has sued the Trump White House for deporting him to Guatemala. An interesting story. We've prepared some information on it. Watch this.
Congresswoman, in your statement after the news broke, you called the agreement, quote, an insult to common sense. Could you explain why for us?
Absolutely, Laura, and thank you for the opportunity. You know, it is unconscionable to think that Guatemala, one of the countries that has the highest murder rate in the world, and at least within Latin America, could be a safe country for people that are coming from Venezuela, from Cuba, and some other countries that are in deep trouble.
Now, this is all coming into play because of the safe third country policy, which states that asylum seekers who are fleeing their country due to violence or instability can come here, but that they cannot actually seek to live here. This has been stated to be a game of deadly musical chairs because the countries to which these people are being moved, in a lot of cases, have no resources and no levels of protection, and it makes it pretty similar to the countries that they're seeking asylum from. And in a case that is perhaps revolutionary that's coming up, it is the UT versus Barr, which violates the Refugee Act, the Immigration and Nationality Act, the Administrative Procedure Act, that are all different types of cases to say why this is something that should be illegal and why all of these different people. We have one example that's stated in the example here of a gay Salvadorian man, but dozens of cases where people are being pushed against their human rights to be able to find asylum and to be able to live with any sense of safety. One of the statements that has been said on this is that the administration makes a mockery of the United States' obligation to protect the persecuted, guiding the U.S. asylum system beyond recognition.
You know, the number one thing when I read that you were doing this story that washed over me is today. When is the last time we remember talking about what was going on with immigrants that were crossing the border and jailing and cages, etc., children? This has fallen off of our radar completely, and we don't discuss it anymore, which is the most disappointing point of this story. We continue in queuing up the world, and we have big news here. Exiled Chinese billionaire has claimed that the COVID-19 virus, which is the coronavirus, has already affected 1.5 million people in China and killed more than 50,000 people. This is hard to watch. Watch this.
Many people, so I get inside information. Is the truth is 1.5 million people is the not only emotion, is the confirmed case, and that's the people now is the burned body more than 50,000, not 30,000 to the now. So this is why CCP don't want the West world to know the truth. This is why they are control the inside the media. 86% inside social media and official media just talk. This is the case, and the sick is from American CIA, but they don't want to talk how much is the people get.
So the official coronavirus death toll in China is a little over 800, but an exiled Chinese businessman says crematoriums are leaking the real figures. A billionaire whistleblower alleges that Wuhan has crematoriums working 24/7. Over 49 crematoriums to be exact. He claims they've cremated some 50,000 coronavirus victims. This is interesting because this whistleblower actually owns some of these crematoriums. Gao Wengai is a Chinese billionaire who has leaked this story, who is now living in exile in the United States.
It's scary. I just don't even know where we go with this story. We are 33 days since the announcement of the virus, and we've moved to the reporting, China hiding it, the World Health Organization responding to it, us banning travel from China and to China, many countries in the world, now to this leaked report that appeared yesterday in Finnish television in Europe that 1.5 million people are infected in China and 50,000 have already died.
Let me ask you, because I know that in the past couple of decades there have been a lot of viruses, pig flu, swine flu, bird flu, that have been the scare as to, is this the next big thing? Is this the next Spanish flu?
Look where we're at right now.
Back wild. But
in my lifetime, I'm older, obviously, than you all. I've never seen anything like this, ever.
Well, this is the Chinese government. It's all about censorship. It's all about secrecy. I wonder how many of these 50,000 people allegedly that are being burned in these crematoriums were still alive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, did you think that?
Yeah.
No, it's a frightening thought, but when you get into the idea that they're being held captive and can't escape this, the fact that they're being put into isolation.
We continue to watch the coronavirus closely here at Q News tonight because it's such a big story. We're going to finish a little lighter. We call it this news segment called The Big Finish, and we're going to do a little lightning round of big stories that are happening today. All ready? We're going to do 60 to 90 seconds. If I'm ready to stop, I'm going to ring the bell. And we're going to move on. Everybody ready?
Let's go.
Okay, let's play. U.S. finds Huawei China, a business in China, has backdoor access to mobile networks globally. A new study and report breaks today. What do you think?
This is the dark side of technology, the danger of technology, because anyone can access your information. We've seen this with the Equifax scare, so we're seeing it yet again.
Yeah, you're already talking about Grindr, and China owns Grindr, so they know everything about me. There we go.
Uh-oh, my goodness. They know everything about you?
Well, you fans
all
at
the
home,
kink?
You fans at home can tune in, and it's at a much cheaper price than if you went to my OnlyFans.
Let's move to topic 2 in the big finish. Facebook is going to pay Reuters to fact check on Facebook deepfakes and more. Are we celebrating? Reuters is going to check.
I feel like that's a scapegoat so that they don't have to take any of the blame when their stories come back wrong. But at least they're doing something.
Scapegoat. I don't trust Facebook to ever do correct in terms of its politics.
Yeah, but Reuters is a legitimate news organization, so it's at least a step in the right direction.
Yes.
Trying.
The big finish, story number 3. White supremacist propaganda is spreading, according to an anti-bias group.
This is how you keep America great.
Again.
Again.
I'm just thinking of Buttigieg now and how apparently he's a white supremacist, so we can't vote for him.
The big finish, topic number 4, very exciting to the gay community. Spider-Man may turn out to be bisexual in the new Sony epic.
Superheroes are all bisexual because they have a greater sense of freedom, so they're open to the possibilities of the world. Shoot me, Spider-Man.
You have no comment.
I have no comment.
Oh,
no, not really.
I have a very good friend that's watching right now that just basically had an orgasm even mentioning Spider-Man and bisexual.
It's true.
The big finish, topic number 5. Virginia Democrats walk off as the GOP invited a pastor denigrating gay people on the House floor.
This is what the true meaning of #walkaway should be. It should be walking away from either Democrats or Republicans or anyone that stands in the way of equality for LGBT people in the United States. And shame on anyone else who doesn't believe otherwise.
The illegitimacy of this pastor was mind-blowing to me. The fact that this was something that he could get away with in 2020 takes me out of this realm and makes me feel like I should be churning butter.
Virginia is an example of what can happen. Just 5 years ago, Virginia was a completely different political state than what happened in this walkout. The big finish, number 6. Jussie Smollett is indicted by a prosecutor in Chicago again.
Over 20 trans women of color were killed in the United States last year. A lot of those cases have gone cold, and we're not trying to find out or bring justice to those voices. Yet Jussie Smollett, who allegedly faked a homophobic, racist attack for means of publicity, can do this and get all this attention. I'm glad that he's going to be held to a standard that if you're going to do this and people are going to take it seriously, but if you're going to fake it in the process, you should be held accountable. Absolutely.
I love that you just said that he's basically obstructing justice, because he's taking money and resources away from cases that matter. And way to go that we're still talking about this 450 episodes into this.
Well, let's hope he's not the president of the United States, because he's going to get away with it. And Jussie Smollett, who? The big finish, number 7. Man who said he wanted to kill thousands of homos at London Pride has been found guilty on terror charges.
This guy didn't even have a plan. He said he wanted to hit double-decker buses or Pride or whatever else. So while I'm glad that they caught him, I have to say that if you're going to get caught, at least put more effort into it. He didn't even know what he wanted, and I think that's what's so sad. He seems clearly incapable of the thought process and mentally ill. It's sad.
Well, speaking of mentally ill with this story, I just have to wonder to myself, when was Mike Pence in London?
I had a line, but I'm stopping. The big finish, number 8. Happy 211th birthday to both Abraham Lincoln and Charles Darwin.
This has to be so exciting for you because Al graduated the same year, so how wonderful.
I was going to say, who's going to make the joke first as to which is it? What was it? When did 211 become the big year for everything? It's actually kind of ironic because this is the year that the Civil War is going to start again, too.
It's 1859 all over again. Abraham Lincoln, where are you when we need you? Big finish, number 9. Happy 16th anniversary in the USA to the initiation of same-sex marriage initiatives.
To people who think that the LGBT movement, the fight for our rights, is over, it's very far from over. We might be able to get married. We can get married on Sunday, but we can be fired on Monday for being LGBT. So this is the importance of this program and why we must vote for candidates that propel equality in 2020.
Oh, we can get married, we can get divorced, and then we can drive off because now it's 16 years old, so it's at least legal to do that.
That is the big finish of tonight's Q News Tonight, and that is today's news for the LGBT community on the world's first daily gay evening news show. Remember, if it's important to the LGBT community, it's important to Q News Tonight. And remember, we'll be here tomorrow night at 7. Good night, America.